Hey everyone, this is Rahul with the Alternative Investors Hangout, and today we have a new guest on. He is Charles Savoie, and he's over at silverstealers.net. Thanks for coming on, Charles.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right, I've read all these stories about gold manipulation, and there's some organizations out there, and I've gotten some individuals who talk about this, but you have actually a different type of story, and it's regarding the Pilgrim Society, not about the Pilgrims in the 1600s. We're talking about the Pilgrim Society, which was created in the early 1900s, and I think it's still going on. I think Paul Volcker's part of it based on my reading and research about this. So please explain a little bit more about the society and how they've been able to manipulate gold, in your opinion.
Okay, it's a profoundly extensive situation, and we'll only be able to, let's say, scratch the surface. It's like attempting to catalog everything in Wikipedia in just a few minutes. This organization has had more of an impact on people's lives than they could possibly conceive of, and they don't even know it exists. For instance, Mount Rushmore in South Dakota is named after one of its members. One of its members invented the traffic signal system of the United States, and I could just go on and on. One of its members rebuilt France after World War I. Now, you want to talk about metals. Okay, this is extremely important because when you talk about money, now you're talking about control over civilization. The organization came about as a result of the wills of Cecil Rhodes, who was, of course, a diamond operator in South Africa. And in studying the founding members of the organization, I'm finding the same people that are long associated with entities like Barclays Bank, Lloyds Bank, Midland Bank, the Bank of England, and who were later identified with the founding of the Federal Reserve System. And, of course, all these entities have to do with issuance of what we may reasonably term synthetic money. Now, in order for money to be synthetic, of course, it has to be something that they create and they issue it as debt. We go into debt to these people. And you're asking about gold. Well, of course, the Silver Stealers is primarily about silver, but if you separate out all the content that strictly addresses gold, there's quite a bit of gold information in there, too. For example, it was in September 1931 that Great Britain announced it was leaving the gold standard. And over in New York, J.P. Morgan announced that, oh, well, you know, this is a momentous move, but, you know, I agree with it, blah, blah, blah. And over the years, these people have been involved in suppressing gold and silver, but actually they started suppressing silver first because in order to get rid of the people's money, which was silver, they had to go after silver first. Then they went after gold. And it's gone on over all these years. We can't get an audit of Fort Knox, William Salmon, Pilgrims of the United States. It's in the Who's Who in America in his listing. When he was Treasury Secretary, he promised a committee of senators that they could go in and audit the Fort Knox gold. And he reneged on his pledge. And while he was Treasury Secretary, he bombed gold from about $200 an ounce down to around $104, $106 an ounce. And while he was doing that, the head of Citicorp, one of our major international banks, who at the time was Walter B. Wriston, and he surfaced in the leaked list of the Pilgrims, New York, for 1969. Wriston said, oh, Simon's doing such a good job of this, he's going to get gold all the way back to $35 an ounce, which is where it was in the London gold pool of the early 1960s. There was a series of public letters in Life magazine in 1963 between President Kennedy and David Rockefeller. David Rockefeller has been a member of the Pilgrim Society since at least 1957 and probably much longer than that. But anyway, Rocky got Kennedy to pass it, oh, we won't raise gold past $35. These people are metal suppressors. They suppress the prices of gold. They suppress the prices of silver. But let me stop my little filibuster here because you might want to get on to another question.
Yeah, there are many topics that I wanted to get into, and actually I was talking to Jeff Nielsen about one of the things that you mentioned about the 1930s and how Britain pretty much rigged the price of silver, and that was one of the causes of the Great Depression. I mean, I was always under the impression that what caused the Great Depression or the early stages of the Depression was that Hoover raised taxes on the rich, and then on top of it, he implemented all these big government programs. FDR followed that model, and as a result, capital was on the sideline. But this is what I learned through Murray Rothbard's book. But basically, from what I've gathered from your work and Jeff Nielsen, that it was Britain rigging the silver market, which also exacerbated the Depression. Would you agree with that?
Actually, yes. Actually, what caused the Great Depression, most economic sources will tell you that the stock market crash in October 1929 was the prime cause of the Depression. Well, that's complete drivel. It caused a lot of people to be financially wiped out. Of course, those in the charm circle knew that it was coming some months ahead of time as the Fed reversed its policies and slammed on the brakes. But the cause of depression was mass unemployment in the United States, Great Britain, and Europe was caused by the purchasing power of hundreds of millions of people in the Far East, in India and China, having their purchasing power stripped from them due to the actions of the Royal Commission on Indian Finance and Currency. Let me give you just a very short, and I mean a short excerpt out of the Silver Stealers. This came out in 1926. The report of the Royal Commission on Indian Currency and Finance was submitted to Lord Irwin, then British Viceroy of India, who proceeded to oversee the melting and dumping of Indian silver rupees on the world market by the hundreds of millions of ounces, crashing the silver price to an all-time historical low of 24.5 cents per ounce in February 1931, triggering the Great Depression by wiping out the majority of the buying power of India and the Far East and China, to whom American industry could no longer export goods, throwing millions of workers out of jobs and into the freezing cold in wintertime, forcing Mexican silver mine workers to choose banditry as the only alternative to starvation after their government couldn't send in enough corn they could subsist on, inciting the murder of American silver mine owners by laid-off workers. New York Times, June 3, 1930, page 32, and causing intentional severe damage to silver holders and miners all over the world. And this same Lord Irwin, who was British Viceroy of India when these decisions were made, later surfaced as president of the Pilgrims of Great Britain in the 1950s. I
mean, don't you also agree that there was maybe even suppression before this Pilgrim Society?
Oh yes. Oh, yeah. Now, as an organization, they didn't formally come into being until July 24, 1902. However, their predecessors have been involved in money rigging and money subversion literally for centuries. For example, the Second Bank of the United States, which ran from 1816 to 1836, the head of the bank was a man named Nicholas Biddle. And as I study the extensive genealogy of members of the Pilgrims organization, I find that there are members of the Biddle family in the lineage of many of these people today. The original Swiss consul general at New York was a man named Albert Gallatin. Gallatin County, Montana is named after this character. Well, Albert Gallatin was a staunch supporter of the United States Bank, and fast forward to around the time of the founding of the Federal Reserve System, who was the secretary of the Pilgrim Society in New York. Oh, one of his descendants, a man named Gallatin. And it just goes on and on and on. John Jacob Astor, he was the head, not the head, but he was the prime director, the domestic power in the Bank of the U.S., along with one of the DuPonts. But John Jacob Astor, he's got a descendant today named Jacqueline Astor Drexel, and I mean right at this moment, who is a beneficiary of what the New York Social Diary called over $100 billion in Manhattan real estate. John Jacob Astor was called the landlord of New York. Well, she's married to John R. Drexel IV, who traces to Francis Drexel, who came to the U.S. in 1837 from Austria and set up the banking house of Drexel and Company in Philadelphia, became one of the largest banking institutions in the United States, and they floated the United States bond issue in 1877 of $260 million. Mr. Drexel. In his maternal ancestry, there are the Earls of Camoy, British nobility tracing to the year 1313.
And I was also looking at some funny things or some weird things that happened in the 1870s. I don't know if you follow this, but it was a crime of 1873 where the U.S. Congress basically demonetized the silver dollar, and that created a wave of nasty deflation during that time frame, and the resumption of specie should have been in silver rather than gold. So what that basically means for those listening was that we were on a gold standard, but we should have been on a silver or a bimetallic standard, and Congress did that intentionally, in my opinion, even though they knew the consequences. So do you know anything about that time frame, and was there any shenanigans going on that you know about, or not really?
Oh, yeah, these same people were involved in the crime of 73. It's fairly well known by those who spent even just a few hours looking into it that an agent was sent from the Bank of England, symbolic board of governors of the Bank of England, named of Ernest Said, S-E-Y-D, with the equivalent of $500,000 U.S. dollars to bribe members of Congress. And of course, when they demonetized silver, what they actually did was they made it law that silver could not be used in making any payments for anything beyond larger than $5 at a time. So most people's mortgages were, of course, bigger than $5 at a time. And so people that owned gold, they were the ones that, they cleaned up. And, of course, the Goulds, G-O-U-L-D-S, they were involved in the Drexels and the Morgans, and the Rothschilds were involved. And, of course, Senator John Sherman from Ohio, who was also our Treasury Secretary. But, yeah, this has been going on by ancestors of these people way before their organization was actually founded.
Yeah, I want to get into a lot more topics, but we don't have time. But I did want to get into this one last issue, and there are a lot of people in the liberty movement that keep on talking about the so-called rich family members in Europe. I think you know that family's name. They're a powerful family in Europe, banking institution. And do you believe in that conspiracy theory of how they own the Fed, how they are pretty much the controllers of the world? You're
talking about the Rothschilds? Of course, Rothschild is German. It means red shield. Some people think it's something about a child, but no. It means red shield. The original name was Bauer, B-A-U-E-R. Well, certainly Cecil Rhodes, from whose wills the Pilgrim Society was founded, his financial backer in diamonds was Lord Rothschild. But it isn't as well known that the British royal family was also among his backers. And I'm not one of these people who believes that the Rothschilds are somewhere over in Europe or Britain and they're dictating policy to all the other rich group of the world. This is more of an alliance between powerful interests, and not just one family telling everybody else what to do. For instance, the British royal family are the world's largest landowners, not the Rothschilds. And so and look at the Queen. The Queen, as long as she's on the throne, she remains the royal patron of the Pilgrim Society. Prince Charles is a very long-time member. Well, of course, Prince Philip too. But the Royal Canadian Mint puts out these 1-ounce silver coins with her likeness on it, and on one side it says $5, meaning $5 Canadian. She's a silver suppressor. The royal family are silver suppressors. Look at the gold maple leaf, $50. See? And of course this is just psychological. Nevertheless, it's an attack on the metals.
Yep, this is quite interesting, Charles. And before I let you go, how can people follow your work and maybe get a copy of the Silver Stealers?
Okay. First of all, I started writing a monthly essay of the month for David Morgan's Silver Investor site over 10 years ago. And I don't know what the exact count was. It came to 112 monthly essays, but the last regular one was December of 2010. I think I called it Get Forex Spot for Your Silver, which was basically telling you in order to do that, you've got to become a jewelry fabricator. I know that idea doesn't sound too appealing to a lot of people, but that's the way that you could do it. Anyway, I've done all these efforts that runs into millions of words in these essays. One essay had 90,000 words. It was the series Britain Against Silver. One of those had 90,000 words in it. But I've done it all as a public service. Nobody's ever asked to pay a scuffed up zinc penny off a parking lot to read any of my stuff. It's all free. So they can go to the archives of silver-investor.com and they can find my free access, publicly available work there. And I have 2 websites that I've put up since then. One is silverstealers.net, and the other is nosilvernationalization.org. And in nosilvernationalization.org, I have links to some of my essays that are in the archives of Silver Investor, and one of them has to do with FDR's gold and silver nationalization, starting in March 1933 and extending to February 1937, which was about the last time that any metal was turned in under the forfeiture order. And this report is 312 pages, and it's primarily from the Commercial and Financial Chronicle, London Times, New York Times, American Economic Review, Mining Congress Journal, Engineering and Mining Review, and other sources. But I've done it all for nothing, because what I'm wanting to do is to head off a nationalization of silver and gold, which there's already precedent for that. Now, I know we're about to run out of time. Let me leave you with just one final detail. It's known from tax filings viewable at a site called GuideStar that Paul Volcker is a vice president of the Pilgrim Society in New York. This is the same Paul Volcker who arranged what was alleged to be a bailout loan for the Dallas Hunt brothers when William Simon and other Pilgrim Society members busted the wheels off of their wagon, and it caused the price of silver to collapse, ruining the Hunt silver play. Paul Volcker arranged those so-called bailout loans such that by 1986, the Hunts had to forfeit 59 million physical ounces of silver. Paul Volcker's the one who broke them out of that. Now Paul Volcker is President Obama's top economic advisor. What's he going to advise Obama to do? Oh, We've got to nationalize gold again because we're in a financial crisis. We've got to nationalize silver because we don't have a defense stockpile or silver reserve anymore. And what they won't tell you is that Pilgrim Society members like Caspar Weinberger, when he was defense secretary, he disposed of over 11 million ounces out of the reserve in his tenure. And there's one final thing I want to say. There's another website called Silver Bear Cafe, which probably this week will be coming out with a much briefer article I have, and it will be titled A Silver Nightmare. My belief is that if the metals community could get enough publicity for the fact that to measure gold and silver suppressors of the last century all apparently traced to membership in this Pilgrim Society, that they would be inhibited from jerking the president's chain to make him nationalize silver again. Because it's right there that they always have the president of the U.S. as an honorary member.
One thing I did want to mention, though, you said that Paul Volcker was involved in the silver massacre with the Hunt brothers, but Paul Volcker raised the Fed funds rate to 21% to save the dollar. So didn't the price of silver go down and gold because Paul Volcker was pretty aggressive? I mean, right now the Fed funds rate is at 0, but it briefly reached 21% in the 1980s.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I remember the high interest rates, yeah. Well, of course, high interest rates have some effect in suppressing metals investments. And Paul Volcker also, when he was head of the Fed, he put out a directive to banks to not lend to people for speculative metals investing purposes. So, yeah, he's a metal suppressor.
All right, Charles. Thanks for coming on again.
Well, I appreciate it.